Hi, welcome to another episode of History in 7 Facts. In this show, we'll explore some of the most interesting things that we know or not know about our own past. In the first chapter, we've explored some of the things we know about the origins of human beings, but in today's episode, I'll try to explain how we actually know so much about our ancestors by simply studying their bones. Well, not simply, but you get the idea. So we often hear scientists talk in detail about the lives of some long dead people or extinct animals, and sometimes we get skeptical. How in the world could you know so much about someone who lived so many thousands of years ago? Well, the answer is you can, but it takes a lot of patience. Starting sometimes with a single bone, archaeologists can deduce countless things about the life of a person. The way your wrist is shaped can describe how the fingers were laid, which in turn can give clues about strength and how that member can be used. By comparing ancient bones to modern ones, you start to have a reference point from which you can then construct your ancient creature. And thanks to the wonders of technology, like the now mundane X-ray, you can analyze the inside of every bone, big and small, and thus find evidence of disease, malnutrition, or worn-out areas. So it all comes down to studying every detail, every groove, every characteristic of every single bone, putting them all together, and thus creating a fascinating but complicated puzzle. Every living being is a masterpiece of nature, a structure so amazing that just by being, it beats its own odds of it ever existing. FYI, the odds of life appearing in the universe is 1 in 10 to the power of 40, which is an insanely huge number. But through a grand game of billions and billions of trials and errors going on simultaneously in the primordial oceans, life did appear. And it perfected itself continuously, changing according to the ever-shifting environment. But even after billions of years of evolution, life isn't perfect. Nothing is. Every living thing has suffered from at least one disease, and diseases leave traces. In the case of bones, diseases can leave visible marks like arthritis, a degenerative disease that can cripple one's joints. A misshaped bone in the legs or feet can tell us about how a person was walking, what type of work he or she might have done, or even what kind of footwear they were using. In some cases, a disease like untreated syphilis can actually destroy bone tissue, leaving it porous. And if the remains are recent enough, the disease can be confirmed by extracting and analyzing the DNA, since traces of pathogens can still be identified. This way, you can create a map of how and when certain viruses or bacteria have spread in a population, sometimes even pinpointing epidemic events, and thus painting a picture of what life had to be like in order for the disease to spread. Probably the most famous hominid ever found is Lucy, an Australopithecus found in Ethiopia in 1974. Finding her was probably the easy part. Recovering her bones was a painstakingly long and arduous job. And I bet you don't know this, but only 40% of her entire skeleton was recovered from the site, out of which only 5 broken pieces came from her skull. Her remains were found on a slope, and 3.2 million years of rain, mud and pressure simply destroyed and washed away the rest. Still, Lucy's remains are one of the best preserved out of all the ancient fossils of such old hominids. And yet, we've managed to learn an astounding amount of things about her. For instance, her ribcage had a conical shape much like the chimpanzees, indicating a large stomach and longer intestines, both of which are needed if you consume a lot of plants. The shape of her legs and how they fit into the rest of the body indicate how she was walking, upright by the way. But her shoulder bones prove that she could still support her own weight while climbing trees. And the skull? You just follow the shapes of what you have, carefully draw all the angles, and voila, you have a reconstructed skull from just 5 pieces. Back to more recent times, one of the best finds an archaeologist can stumble upon is a grave. They contain tons of information. For instance, since times immemorial, people have often been buried with different items. Foods can tell us everything we need to know about their diets, how they were made, how nutritious they were, etc. The vessels in which they are placed tell us about how they were made, at what temperature, using what materials. Decorations such as precious metals and pearls give away their knowledge of metalworking, mining, and trade. Even flowers and pollen give us information about the state of the environment. And by comparing different remains from different periods, you can actually create a timeline of how an ancient society and their environment evolved through time. Men and women are slightly different, so finding out the gender is fairly easy. And thanks to a mathematical relation, height is not really a problem either. All you have to do is multiply the femur's length in centimeters by 2.6, add 65, and that'll give you a pretty accurate height of that person, regardless of their gender. But what about a broken bone? What can that teach us? Well, bones mend over time, but the healing leaves a mark, the shape and size of which basically gives away the cause of the injury. But how they heal is also important. A well-healed bone means it was taken care of by a healer or a doctor, which means that at the very least, they had a healer or had knowledge about how to heal certain injuries. Finding multiple remains with well-mended bones from the same period in the same area would mean that those people lived in a society where healing wasn't reserved only for the rich. And the opposite is true when you have many cases of bones with bad sutures and only a few with well-healed fractures, thus describing the society. Bones can tell us a lot of bad things too. Make no mistake, life in the past was no walk in the park. Notches in certain areas, like joints and knuckles, form over long periods of time, usually from overuse or squatting. Nodules on the spine are a clear indicator that the person was constantly on a daily basis lifting heavy things by pulling or using straps. Multiple broken bones over long periods mean that you're looking at someone who was probably beaten often and used for hard labor, indicating that he or she was either a slave or a prisoner. By putting all the data together and analyzing other remains from the same area, you can build a grim picture of these sad but very real aspects of human societies. More often than not, we forget how lucky we are that we live when we live where we live. Apart from wars, slavery, and diseases, there's another aspect of life that today is no longer very common, but in the past, it plagued human societies no matter where they were. Famine. And amazingly, we can learn about them through bones. One of the strongest indicators of a famine is the presence of the Harris lines. Also known as growth arrest lines, these are lines of increased bone density that represent the position of the growth plate at the time of the famine. They basically show us when children stopped growing because they were starving. Harris lines aren't always caused by malnutrition, but when you find many remains with the same symptoms, you get the idea. And famines were omnipresent in ancient times, fading away only after we've invented agriculture. So next time you complain about your food, think about this. For more than 95% of our time on Earth, we've spent our lives as hunter-gatherers, which means that most people that have ever lived were almost constantly on the brink of starvation. Thank you for watching this episode of 7 Facts. I hope this was interesting and informative, and maybe it even inspired you to look into it further on your own. If you liked this video, please thumbs up and subscribe. While you're downstairs, let me know what you think about this video. Please consider visiting my Patreon page and become a patron. The link is in the description. I hope to see you next time. Bye.